George the truck driver had to turn his head as he followed that figure. God damn, he thought to himself. As she jogged out of his view, he turned back and quickly grabbed the steering wheel with 2 hands. He swerved the moving truck away from a parked car as he made his way along the winding roads of this California housing community. Angie Marks never knew it, but she had caused quite a few accidents in her lifetime. The lifelong jogger always had a figure to kill, although lately it had changed. At 28, she stood 5 feet 11 with deep, dark, luxurious red hair. A college athlete in track and volleyball, she never disappointed. Her height attributed to her long legs and slender frame. Over the last couple years, her body had undergone some changes. She met her husband Mark her last year in college. He was going to law school at her university. Mark Marks had the name of a winner and soon became one. He quickly rose in the ranks of one of Hollywood's premier talent agencies. On the side, he would take occasional cases out of his small law firm. He had money coming in hand over fist. He had always been a go-getter, whether it was in business or life. His last year in law school, his buddies had taken him out to one of the school's volleyball games. Dude, you have to check out the chicks in the spandex shorts, jumping up and down all sweaty. It'll be a fun time. It was there on the team's senior night that he saw Angie. Not only did her dark red hair stand out, but the jiggle in her figure and the fact that she had the biggest chest on the team helped get her noticed too. Mark quickly found her afterwards and introduced himself. Her shy, innocent demeanor gave way to his aggressiveness. She was flattered at the attention he showered her with, although she blushed often when they went out and he would show her off. He loved to brag to the world that he had her. She was a knockout. They married a year after they both graduated. She had her degree in marketing with a minor in economics, and he had passed the bar shortly after her graduation. 1 year later, they were off as a glamorous, successful couple. The hit at every party as Mark would wine and dine with anyone and everyone, Angie faithfully at his side every time. Mark's success and investing resulted in his newest acquisition. 9 months ago, they moved into a house overlooking the expressway along the hills outside of Los Angeles. It was a new housing community that the young and powerful were all moving into. Houses easily ran up to 8 digits in price, and Mark had the second most expensive one. It was one of 2 that overlooked the expressways and rolling hills of California. The houses had innovative designs done by one of the most celebrated architects out of San Francisco. Angie loved the house. She was infatuated with it. Was being a key word. When they moved, Angie had to give up her job at a small advertising agency. Upon their moving in, Mark made it his duty to make sure no want ads made their way into their house. He was imperative after this latest acquisition and promotion at his job that Angie wouldn't work anymore. Nearly a year of not working could have driven her crazy had it not been for her renewed love of athletics. In high school, Angie had lettered in 3 sports: soccer, volleyball, and track. She gave up soccer at school because she couldn't devote herself to 3 sports programs at a Division I school. Her soccer accomplishments never matched any of her others in volleyball and track. Upon moving, Angie joined a local health club and joined a volleyball league at a nearby community center. Her success in the weight room resulted in Mark being able to get her a job as a model in a commercial for a nationwide chain of health clubs. The 9 months of morning jogs and nightly workouts had paid off. Angie thought that her body looked the best it ever had, even though she got nervous with her 29th birthday pending and the end of her 20s looming. Mark never said a thing about her looks unless they were at a party and he was bragging. She thought that after 6 years of marriage he would still notice her a little bit, outside of social gatherings. Although always muscular, her legs were more toned than ever. Athletically shaped calves, which almost never needed her to wear high heels to make them look good, led to sculptured thighs and hamstrings which left most men gazing for hours wherever she went. The mind-numbing legs ended where her firm buttocks started. Mark would stare at the excellent shape they would take as she kneeled in front of him whenever they had fun. The muscular halves of her figure slimmed off to a narrow waist and smoothly muscled back. Following her waist around to muscled abdominal muscles which just now recently had become more and more prominent. The generous swellings were wondrous and never ceased to amaze. Her lifting had made them firmer and even more magnificent. Her mother suggested that perhaps it was the birth control pills she was taking. Mark knew they were wonderful the first time they went golfing together. She had worn a sleeveless sweater vest, and whenever she leaned forward to pick up a club or ball, even leaning in the golf cart, you could see they held their amazing full round shape. As if men didn't spend enough time on her body parts, they were never disappointed when she wore sweaters or pants. Which she rarely needed to in the wonderful California weather. Her face was sweet and easily conveyed her many emotions. Friends had recently asked if she was related to the lady from the TV show Alias. Although she wasn't related to Jennifer Garner, they bared a slight resemblance. A set of well-shaped eyebrows laid atop blue eyes, where a thin pert nose sat atop sexy lips. Her lips weren't amazingly full, yet sensual and inviting. Their movements were always eye-catching whenever they slightly separated during a coy smile or shy laugh which she often let loose during conversation. Angie jogged past her house for the second time this morning. The housing community wasn't very large, and to pass by her house several times wasn't out of the ordinary for Angie. This time around she noticed the same moving truck that had passed her before was parked at the house next door. The new neighbors must be moving, she thought to herself as she wondered who would move next door. The last neighbors had been an elderly couple, the husband a former bigwig at a movie studio in Hollywood. She wondered who would be moving in now. The house had been up for sale for 6 months, and Angie welcomed the idea of having neighbors, since there were no neighbors to the right of the house. Since her house was one of only 2 that overlooked the expressways and winding hills. Angie wiped the sweat from her brow and walked into her house. On the way into her house she eyed the furniture being moved in. Artist types probably, she thought as she noticed some African artwork and sculptures being moved in, along with black leather furniture which would contrast with the white walls she saw inside the home. Angie cursed herself for forgetting to pick up her mail from the box at the front of the lawn. As she walked to the box, she wondered why one of the movers was dressed so nicely. He was a rather tall individual, standing about 6'5" or 6. He had largely built arms and shoulders, and his impressive clothes did little to hide a well-kept body. He had dark brown skin and very short hair. He turned and looked at Angie walking down the driveway and looked at the full mailbox. "Let me help you with that," he said as he took the mail into his hand and jogged up to Angie, handing her the mail. "Thanks, you didn't have to. I could have gotten it," she said, already wanting to turn away due to her shy nature. "No problem, it's my pleasure. After all, what are neighbors for?" he told her. Angie opened her eyes a little wider than usual, surprised at the fact that her neighbor was this impeccably dressed man whom she had mistaken as a mover. It just surprised Angie as it would many people. A person usually had trouble finding decent-priced housing due to unfair pricing, let alone finding a house in such a high-priced housing community. "I see you're already meeting the neighbors," said a beautiful black woman walking towards the 2. "Yes, but I haven't been so lucky to get a name," the man said. "Oh, how rude of me, I'm sorry, just a little tired and all." "I'm Angie," she said, offering them her hand. With a handshake the man introduced himself and his wife. "I'm Calvin. Most people call me Cal, and this is my wife Shauna." "Pleasure to meet you," Angie said, shaking hands with Shauna. "It'll be so nice to finally have some neighbors around here." "Oh heck, honey," Shauna shouted as she quickly turned and ran. A mover had dropped a piece of artwork and she quickly wanted to inspect the damage. "Oh my," Angie said, worried about the piece. "Don't worry, she's way too high-strung. I'm sure it's fine," Calvin said with a smile. "Oh no, I know how it is. I'm expecting movers today too. My husband bought an entertainment thing or something. I'm sure he'd be something too. I mean, not that she's just, Angie stammered. With a chuckle Calvin turned to her. "Not to worry, I know what you mean. My wife is the one in charge around here. She's usually high-strung. I better go help her out before she takes out a piece of me too." "Nice meeting you." "Me too," Angie said as Calvin turned to calm down his wife, who was now chewing out the mover. Angie walked off into the house, but not without about 6 pairs of movers' eyes following her in. Just as she closed the door, the phone rang. It was her husband Mark from work. "Hey honey, how was the jog?" he asked. "Pretty good. I met our new neighbors," Angie told her husband. "Are they old farts like the last 2? "No, actually they're a young couple. I'd guess about our age too." "Really? Do you recognize the guy? Does he play for the Lakers or Clippers?" he asked. "I don't think so. Don't really recognize him. Maybe he plays football. He's a little slim though. Probably a corner or something," Angie told her husband. "Well, either way I'll make sure to introduce myself. Make sure to invite them to the barbecue. Would be nice to have a superstar athlete at the thing. Maybe I can talk him into some different representation. I'll be home soon, baby." "Movers haven't showed up yet, have they?" "Not yet. Just the neighbors and their movers." "Okay, Take it easy, hun. Okay, love you, Mark. She said sweetly into the phone. Later, baby, he said, hanging up the phone at his office. Time passed and an invitation was dropped in the neighbor's mailbox. Angie hadn't seen the couple since that morning and figured dropping an extra invitation would be just as nice as inviting them face-to-face. Mark had set the date but left most of the planning to Angie since he figured she had plenty of free time. It had been a hectic day as Angie ran all over trying to get the chairs, tables and catering in order as everything was being set up. She wondered to herself what the point of all this stress was since nearly all of the guests were friends or co-workers of Mark. Angie had no real friends and Mark had made up the guest list. As Angie pointed out the area where the buffet table would go, she noticed the one person she had invited herself. Calvin was in his backyard checking out his garden. Hey there, Cal, Angie shrieked so he could hear her over the distance and moving noise. Calvin turned around, a smile crossed his face to see his neighbor. You look busy, he said, nearing the fence that divided their yards. Yeah, just trying to keep everything in some kind of order. You got my invitation, right? Shauna and I weren't too sure if we should come. Why not? Just we're new here and I don't think we'd be too comfortable among all these new people. Looks like it's going to be a pretty busy night. Angie felt a sense of disappointment and asked, It would mean a lot to me if you guys came. I don't even know everyone that will be here. It's mostly some neighbors and my husband's co-workers. You guys would be the only ones I really know. I could use some company, you know. Then we'll be there. I'll let Shauna know. She's usually in charge, but I'll drag her. Thanks a lot, Cal, Angie said as they both turned from each other to tend to their business. The party had started and Angie was busy making sure the guests were attended to. She was the perfect wife as she stood by Mark's side welcoming all the partygoers. She wore a yellow bikini top that covered her well. It was extremely hard to find tops that fit well. Short khakis did little to hide her long defined legs. After an hour or two, she went about making sure everybody had their fill of food and were doing well. She took a seat to finally take a breather that night when a sight she didn't expect to see appeared. Cal and Shauna came into the backyard ready to mingle. Wearing a bright, genuine smile, Angie approached the couple. Cal wore a white wife beater, which for the first time let Angie see just how well he took care of himself. He too had on some khaki shorts while Shauna looked sensual and stunning. She wore a purple bikini top, which barely supported her. Her bikini bottom was covered by a see-through purple sarong, which she wrapped around her waist. Almost every man's eyes darted to her. Hey there, glad to see you guys make it, Angie said. Shauna and her hugged. Almost every guy watching them wouldn't miss this for the world. Shauna replied as they walked towards the food. Angie directed them towards the food and introduced them to the Walshes that lived down the street. Angie made her way back towards to the house and she ran into Mark. Are those the neighbors you were talking about? He asked. Yeah, you know who they are? Mark asked. No clue. He's a small-time venture capitalist and she's a big-time lawyer. I've heard of her before. Her name is Shauna, right? Yeah, and he's Calvin. Well, he's no big-timer, but his wife is. I'll have to go introduce myself. Why don't you go make sure everyone's having their drinks refreshed, sweetie? Okay, honey. Angie walked back into the house and make sure the liquor levels were up to par. When she returned outside, she saw Mark already working the neighbors with his trademark smile and mingling. She knew when he got into his work mode and he definitely was laying on the cheesy charm. She used to think it was cute, but it seemed more and more that Mark would lay the charm on whenever possible. She didn't mind him taking work home, but he could relax a little more. Some guests began to leave around midnight, but the more lively guests were starting to get rowdy. The party was picking up and Angie was beginning to feel drained. The whole day had been a blur and she was just content to sit with her chair against the fence near a tiki torch. She sipped her drink when Calvin took a seat next to her. You pooped out too? He asked. Definitely. It's a fun time here, but the whole day is just draining. Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel tired too. I've had all the moving and gardening plans to take care of. I wish I could go home and crash, but Shauna is having a ball now and won't leave. With a little giggle, Angie remarked, and she didn't want to come in the first place. Yeah, and now she's definitely enjoying herself. Your husband too, Cal remarked as he pointed to the dance area where Shauna was dancing with Mark. Yeah, those two have seemed to hit it off, Angie remarked, her voice trailing from nervousness. Watching her husband dance with Shauna made her a little insecure. Yeah, well, you know how it is to be power players in this town. You get to a party and start mingling. That's their thing, I guess. Cal said, leaned back in his chair watching the two dance together as well. So I guess we'll be working together. He added to change the topic, as the scene seemed to make them both uncomfortable. We are? Angie said quizzically. Your husband said you're doing a poster shoot for some new dietary supplement line? Yeah, I'm supposed to do it with another guy. Mark gave it to you? Yeah, he came up and said I looked like I work out and gave me the job. I figured why not, I have nothing to do during the day. Yeah, it's a good way to kill some time. So do you know how to get there? Not really, I'll offer a ride if you give directions. Cal offered. Deal then, Angie said with a smile on her face. The night finally came to an end and Mark was clearly wasted. Angie had to help him into the house after she saw all the guests off. Mark stumbled onto the bed in his clothes and stared at the ceiling blankly, letting out a loud groan. Honey? Angie asked him, but all he could moan was, wah? So I'm going to work with Calvin tomorrow? This'll be great. I give him work and I can get to talk to his wife more. She is big time. If I can get to work with her firm or pull her to us, I'd be a hero. I guess that's a good idea. Angie agreed, thinking in the back of her mind that it wasn't exactly ethical as to why he chose Calvin. Plus, did you see her? Geez, Mark groaned as he finally passed out and started snoring. Angie awoke that morning with a sense of excitement. She had enjoyed talking to Calvin and was going to enjoy his company. She normally didn't like these modeling shoots due to her shy nature, but something about this day made her calm about the job. Mark's comments about his model selection and Shauna the neighbor disturbed her though. She knew Mark could be ambitious sometimes, but his growing workaholism didn't sit well with her. She dressed in her loose track pants and t-shirt as she grabbed her gym bag and walked outside to Calvin's Escalade. He had called earlier and let her know he'd be outside in a few minutes. She jumped in the car to see Cal dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Need a ride? He asked. Maybe, depends on where you're going. She replied. Oh me? I just get to work with a gorgeous woman today. That's all I'm headed to. Angie blushed. She hadn't been called gorgeous in a long time. Thanks for the compliment. Well, I'm just as lucky to be working with a handsome man too. She offered back. She meant it too. Calvin was in great shape and his face was handsomely chiseled. So how was the party? Angie asked. It was great. We really had a good time. That's good to hear. I'm glad to see we're getting along now. I was afraid our neighbors would be some really unsavory people. Well, I hope we're up to par. So your husband's an agent? Cal inquired. Yeah, he's always on call too, it seems. He gets really engrossed in his work. Yeah, Shauna's the same way. She's a real work monger. You said you were retired last night. You seem young to be retired. Angie asked. Well, semi-retired. I used to be web designer and a business major back in school. I helped start up 2 internet companies and got out at the right time. So I have some time and money to play around with. I like to take vacations, but Shauna hates them. Mark too. So what school did you go to? Georgia Tech. That's where I met Shauna. You? UCLA. I met Mark while he was at the law school. You're going to have to take a left here, Angie said, pointing. Cal began to turn the car when a white Ferrari came speeding the other way. He quickly slammed the brakes as they stopped in a jolt. Cal shot his arm out to keep Angie back, his entire arm pressed against her large chest as she shot forward. Their hearts beating incredibly fast, he asked, Are you all right? He realized he hadn't removed his arms and pulled it back quickly, saying sorry. Wow, that a-hole was in a hurry, Angie said, catching her breath. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, but having Cal's arm against her chest seemed gratifying. She hadn't had another man touch her there in a while. Following the near accident, they pulled into the studio lot and entered the photographer's building. You two here for the diet shoot? The photographer asked as they walked in. He was balding and had a long ponytail. Yes, sir, Cal answered. Wardrobe is down that hall. We only have the one on the right, number 19, open. We've got you scheduled for 2 outfit changes. They're both in there. You've got 20 minutes. He quickly instructed as he left to another studio with one camera in his hand and another draped around his neck. Make sure to like this video if you want the next part of the story.